Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on how to adjust your insider threat program in today's world with a special social engineering edition. We're going to give everybody just a couple of more minutes to join. We still see a few folks trickling in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, it is 3 minutes after the hour. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining today's webinar, which is on how to adjust your insider threat program in today's world with a special social engineering edition. We know that this is a huge topic of discussion today, especially as people continue to work in all different areas and work outside of the office, as well as in hybrid environments, and the trends that we're seeing around how attackers continue to take advantage of this distributed workforce using social engineering tactics. So we'll dig into a lot of that. Before we do, quick introduction and background on me. I am the host for today's webinar. My name is Dr. Christine Izuakor, founder and CEO of Cyber Pop-Up. I've spent over a decade leading a variety of different cybersecurity functions in the Fortune 100 space. Also earned a PhD in security engineering. So just a huge cybersecurity nerd all around. We also have John on the call, who will be hopping on towards the end to share more about Veriato. So stay tuned for that. A quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about the intersection of insider threat and social engineering and how these things sort of coexist and what this really means when these things come together. Then we'll get into some key social engineering trends from this year and what we can expect into next year. I'll talk through some real world attack examples. Then we'll get into challenges in combating some of these threats and tips for how you can adapt your insider threat management approach. And then again, we'll have that quick overview of tangible solutions and ways that you can address these risks at the end. Now, jumping right in, and quickly before I do, as always, feel free to ask questions throughout this. Feel free to pop questions into the chat area. I'll be sure to keep an eye on those and make sure that we get through as many of those as we can. Now, jumping into the trends, This one is honestly not surprising at this point, but still a pretty significant one, right? 98% of breaches involve some sort of social engineering, some sort of human error. And just to level set on what social engineering is, right? It's when attackers or malicious individuals are looking to take advantage of human beings and sometimes how naive they might be, or leverage human beings in a way that allows them to get into corporations and do things they're unauthorized to do. And so some common ones that you hear and think about are like everything from email phishing to phishing, which is the voice version of that, and all of the sort of calls that you get of people trying to trick you into believing they're somebody that they're not in order to disclose information. Smishing is another one with the exact same concept, just on the text message or SMS side. And so just some examples of some of the common social engineering approaches, but we're still seeing that these continue to be a popular means of attack. Another interesting one is that 21% of current and former employees use social engineering to gain a financial advantage. Sometimes it's for revenge if they're disgruntled or something wrong happens, or just out of curiosity or fun. And so I think this one is important to call out because we're not just talking about people who are accidentally tricked into giving up their passwords or into clicking on a phishing email. Like, sure, a lot of it is accidental, a lot of it is non-malicious, but there's also this segment of the insider threat, and that's where this really comes together, right? Of insider threat can be, people who are, again, naive and doing things by error, or these people who have this intentional malicious intent. And so pretty concerning stat there, and something to pay attention to. Another interesting one, 60% of IT professionals cite recent hires as being at high risk of social engineering. And so as we look at today's world, and as we look at what some are calling the great resignation and all of the movement that is happening in terms of employees and people just shifting around, as you begin to introduce new folks into environments, there's just that higher risk that professionals are seeing when it comes to the risks of employees falling for some of these social engineering attacks. Another one, getting into the remote side even more, 67% of attacks today target remote employees. And so when you think about how the shift to remote work has really expanded the threat landscape and really expanded what we have to protect, and how many nodes, so to speak, or how many devices, how many endpoints are out there and where they're located, as that continues to expand, the attack surface continues to expand, those people become a lot more easily accessible by attackers. And so again, we're seeing this this trend and this shift in that more of these attacks, especially on the social engineering side, are targeting remote employees. Another interesting one, 74% of organizations attribute recent cyber attacks to remote work technology vulnerabilities. And so from a technology standpoint, it's also something to look at and to consider, especially when we think about the source of some of these issues and why these things are happening. There's a huge, I would say, sort of human element and people element to it, but of course we can't forget the technology side and the vulnerabilities that exist in that space. Now, those are a couple of trends, and I think they set up the conversation very nicely for digging into some of these areas more, and looking at how attackers today are starting to leverage advanced social engineering tactics and social engineering approaches, especially as people continue to work remotely and work in hybrid environments, and how they're using that, because I think it's really important in order to understand, what's going on and how they're using it in order to defend against it, right? And so we'll get into that in the second half of this presentation. But we'll do a quick dive into the social engineering piece. And again, feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go through this, because there's going to be a lot of interesting information and stories throughout this. One question that I already see is sort of what's driving these social engineering attacks, or what's driving these trends. And I think it's a good question. I think there's a couple of different trends that are driving this. Like I mentioned, the attack surface is just much larger and a lot more difficult to manage and control as we see this shift into, permanent remote work and hybrid environments and so on. I think that in today's economy, especially I mentioned before the Great Resignation, coming out of a pandemic or still navigating a pandemic, right? There's challenges associated with that from a financial standpoint for people, and so there's this greater incentive to launch some of these attacks or break some of these rules for financial gain. We've seen that. I think another thing to consider from a social engineering standpoint specifically is that social media is a malicious hacker's best friend. There's so much information out there that you can find on people and use to just aggregate this data to really understand who a person is, what matters to them, what their behaviors are, so that you can start to replicate that, and so you can start to use that in social engineering attacks. And so in today's day and age where so much information is available on social media and so much information is available online, it's a lot easier to launch these things. I was just watching the other day video. It's actually kind of old, but it's still pretty hilarious to watch. Where there was a news like a news interviewer or somebody who's like walking down the street, asking people what would seem like general innocent questions, but all of those questions sort of led to those people disclosing their passwords. And it's pretty fascinating to watch. But it's just a basic example of how people are unknowingly and unknowingly like putting all of this information out there. And when it's just one bit of information here, maybe you post a picture, or you post where your favorite coffee shop is, or you post a picture of your kid with their name, all of these individual pieces of information that don't seem too important, or like they would disclose much. When someone is able to aggregate all of that and pull it together and have a true full image of you, that's when that information can be weaponized and can get dangerous. And so that's another sort of a trend that we're seeing in why these social engineering attacks continue to rise and continue to be successful. And so a couple of trends that I'll dig into are deepfakes, because that is a huge topic of discussion right now. Business email compromise has been around for quite a while, but still an important part of discussion. We'll talk about trends in phishing as a service, and then we'll also get into some of the current phishing tactics that we're seeing and trends there. So jumping right into that, on the deep fake side. So this is one of the, I would say, most troubling social engineering trends right now, the rise of deep fake attacks. And just to level set on what that is, these are scenarios where machine learning is used to create a super convincing false video or false audio recording of real people. Now, what's really concerning about this is how the technology just continues to advance over time in terms of quality. So basically, these systems can now produce images that are nearly indistinguishable from real photographs. Whereas a few years ago, as you can see in this picture, like when you would try to use these sort of systems or algorithms to generate these kinds of images, it would still be super fuzzy. It'd be obviously realistic. It'd look very off. Whereas today, these things look very realistic. And so that is a trend that attackers and malicious people are now taking advantage of. Now, some people are having fun with this type of technology. Of course, on social media, we've seen tons of cool videos and examples. Clearly, this is not real, but it's just an example of how deepfakes are used. But people are using these for not so great things as well. And so this, for example, is a fake video that was made of Mark Zuckerberg. This is not an authentic video of him. I left the audio off, but if you were to listen to this, they also were able to sort of replicate his voice and make it seem like he's saying things that, as the CEO of this company or the leader of this company, he probably wouldn't say. And so it's just a good example of how these things can evolve and be used to spread misinformation, to impersonate company leaders and trick employees into doing, risky behavior and transactions and things like that, which we've already seen take place in real life. And so the way that this impacts the cybersecurity industry, digging into that more, is, like I mentioned, when we're educating people on how to avoid, things like phishing attacks and traditional social engineering attack methods, we're telling them like, hey, make sure that the email doesn't look weird, or make sure that it's coming from somebody that you can trust. And when you get these super realistic videos and audio files, that becomes even harder when it comes to educating people on what's real and what's not. And so yeah, this is something that attackers continue to look at and continue to use. There's a lot of chatter on this on dark web forums and so on. Now, getting into a real example of this, so the first known deepfake attack occurred back in March of 2019, and it was revealed by an insurance company, which had to cover the cost of this unfortunate incident. But basically, this scam started when the CEO of an energy firm got a call from his boss, which was a German like parent company. But it, of course, was not his boss. It was a very realistic deep fake audio file. And so this person heard that boss's voice. It was the right tone. It had the German accent, asking to transfer almost $250,000 to the account of a supplier. And so of course they're like, okay, this is my boss. Like I'm sure, like I can hear the voice. Like there was a call. So yeah, that person did what they were asked, only to find out later that that was fraud, and that person had used an AI-driven sort of deepfake to launch that attack. So yeah, we continue to see things like this grow. There was another scenario where criminals used deepfake technology to steal $35 million from a company out in the United Arab Emirates, and they basically used deep voice or deep fakes to spoof the voice of one of the company's directors, so very similar situation, and trick them into transferring money into a bogus account. And so again, a couple of these continue to pop up here and there, but definitely something to pay attention to. Now, a lot of this ties together from a social engineering standpoint, because what I mentioned before around deep fakes and things like that, they're all just different like channels or vehicles to getting to the same end game, which is tricking people into doing things that they shouldn't. And so business email compromise is another very common way to do that. Sometimes the two methods are even like blended together and used together. But in this case, so business email compromise, this has been around for a while. Like I had mentioned before, it's one of the most damaging financial sort of crimes, or crimes in general. This is basically where attackers are impersonating trusted users through email as well, in order to transfer funds and do things like that. Now, the average cost of an attack is pretty high. When you think about the frequency of these attacks, and just how often they tend to happen. And when you look at the across the industry, that's even higher. The rate at which it's growing, and where it'll be in the next couple of years, 5 billion is what it's expected to cost people. And so huge problem on that front. Now, quick example of this side, and this is something I wanted to touch on this one, because I think there's two sides or two edges to this. It's like on one end, this, and here I'll just tell more about what happened, and then I'll get into the two sides. So basically, at one point, there was this business email compromise scam where this person, sent in emails. They did phone phishing operations. They set up fake companies. They opened fraudulent bank accounts to redirect wires. Like, they did all of this stuff in this scheme to get people to transfer money to bogus accounts and rip people off. This person earned over $250,000 doing this. But the flip side to that, and what I wanted to touch on in terms of trends, is law enforcement is starting to crack down on these attacks much more, and we're starting to see collaboration across both, state, federal, international levels, like people really coming together to try to address some of these problems, because it's huge. Like I said before, it's trending towards $5 billion in losses, and so it's a problem for everybody. And so in this case, the person behind these scams was actually sentenced in June of this year to 2.5 years in prison for his role in this scam. And so, yeah, I wanted to call this one out because I think there's importance to the fact that, like, these scams continue to happen, but we're also starting to see people held accountable for them as well. Another one, just to give a different example, from a business email compromise standpoint, is folks being tricked to install malicious code and things on their devices. So there was one, for example, in which, let's say a employee or somebody receives a blank email with a subject line that says, something random. It contains an attachment that looks like an Excel spreadsheet or something that's very relatable to the subject, when in reality, of course, it's a disguised file that is malicious. And what was interesting about some of the more recent ones is they would include code that triggered a pop-up notification saying, hey, you've been accidentally logged out of, let's say, Microsoft 365, or whatever system you're using. You need to log back in order to actually continue with what you're doing. And then, of course, that's a fraudulent form. The credentials get sent over to the attackers in order for them to run their scam. And so, yeah, this is another example of a business email compromise. Now, getting into another important trend that is really enabling a lot of these sort of phishing attacks and email attacks and so on, is the rise of phishing as a service. And this is something where it's a trend that's happening, I feel like, across the entire industry, because you might have heard about, like, ransomware as a service, phishing as a service, like malware kits as a service, like all of these things where basically experienced cyber criminals are able to make money by, instead of just creating and launching their own attacks for companies, like they create these attacks and then they basically sell them or allow people to subscribe basically to these attacks so that anyone can launch sophisticated attacks at this point. And so this trend has really lowered the bar in terms of people looking to enter the cybercrime industry, because it makes it a lot easier for you to launch those sophisticated attacks again on a pretty low budget, actually. So and how this works, again, just to level set. So it's basically a SaaS model, similar to going out and signing up for Netflix, or signing up for anything else that's sort of a subscription-based service. But yeah, consumers are able to access a cloud-based phishing application monthly or with an annual subscription. And these started as low as $50 per month. And so 2021 has just seen the emergence of a lot of these tools to help attackers, and they continue to grow every day. In fact, these types of sellers grew by 120% in the last few years. Another thing is that, again, this is a very low barrier to entry. So these solutions are super affordable and super accessible, 20 to less than $1,000 here. Like I mentioned, these work as subscriptions. So there's, different levels to this. Some of it gets pretty sophisticated, but you can get email templates, you can get landing page templates, you can get credential theft configurations. There's all of these different things that you can get through these phishing as a service subscriptions. And so this is what's making it really easy for people to continue to launch these attacks. These are super professional organizations and operations. So they have online shopping spaces on the dark web where you can go out and shop and figure out which brands you want to impersonate or how you want to approach some of these things. That even have reviews so that you can see which ones are good in the industry versus which ones are not. And so I say all that to say these are really growing in sophistication, and these are really almost like enterprise level SaaS solutions to a certain extent, just on the dark side. And so last piece that I want to touch on more is getting into phishing and some of the trends and tactics there. So I want to touch really quickly on some of the brands that continue to be impersonated. So attackers still leverage brands that users trust, of course. Microsoft, DHL, LinkedIn continue to be some of the most popular ones that get targeted. And of course, we see tons of other household names on here. One thing that I'll call out is that I think a lot of, and we'll get into some of these challenges in a moment, but a lot of traditional detection tools will try to look for these brand names and look for, subtle misspellings and look for little things that can sort of give the red flag or the insight that some of these things are off. And so as attackers continue to use these brands, they're getting creative in how they do that in ways that fly under the radar. For example, with Microsoft, like you can see like the logos, like the four squares with the different colors. Well, if you're using a detection solution that is looking for, that kind of logo or that kind of pattern in an image, which some of them do, instead of using an image logo, or instead of using that that piece, they'll instead just like include the words or include almost like a table that has like the colors filled in versus an image, like little things like that to be creative and figure out how to evade traditional detection methodologies or things that are being seen. Another piece that I want to touch on is content phishing. So this is one that has seen some pretty significant growth. This involves apps that seek user permission to gain legitimate access to company services or files. And this is an effective method because asking for permission just seems less suspicious than asking for credentials. Like if something pops up and says, hey, like, enter your password, versus if something just pops up and says, hey, like grant permission or whatever, people for whatever reason tend to not necessarily question that as much from a general user perspective. Now, shifting gears into challenges and then some of the things that we can do to adapt here. So a couple of key challenges that come up when thinking about how to reduce insider threat, especially in today's world. One, all of the examples and things that I've talked through here just paint the picture and share the reality that attacks are getting more sophisticated, especially when you look at deepfakes and things like that. It's becoming very hard to distinguish reality from what is fake. And so user error is inevitable now more than ever, especially in remote environments where people are honestly more distracted. There's just more opportunity for different risks to be introduced as people are working in different places. And so yeah, I think it's a part of the big challenge here is that sophistication is going up and user vulnerability is going up at the same time, of course. And so that's always a recipe for greater risk and greater challenges. Another piece that I think people tend to underestimate is that for the most part, especially when these insider threats or incidents that happen are non-malicious and they're accidental, this stuff can be scary for employees. Like people when they fall for phishing attacks or when they fall for some of these social engineering attacks and realize it, 9 times out of 10, like especially if it's not intentional, like they're scared of like what the impact will be. Am I going to lose my job because of this? All kinds of things. And so I think that's another challenge in finding the balance of encouraging employees and encouraging people to know how to react to these things and know how to get help versus sitting in that fear, because the longer people sit in that kind of fear, and I've seen it before, like I'm speaking from experience, the longer people sit in that fear and that hesitancy to speak up and say that they've messed up and introduced something bad to the network, the harder it is to and the slower the response is to controlling that. And then the last piece, of course, is traditional anomaly-based detection is limited. So we, talk about the concepts of false positives a lot. We don't talk about the concepts of false negatives a lot, but I feel like they're both huge issues in this space. False positives, very obvious, right? It's like when you're using very traditional anomaly-based detection, which is where you're trying to figure out like what a normal baseline is, just in terms of like the network and users and what's normal for people to do, and then looking at anything that goes beyond that threshold of what's normal. That's a good fundamental way to identify threats, but as these threats continue to advance and work to evade some of those traditional things, you just have to think differently about this. And then the other piece, again, is false negatives. When someone is able to use social engineering to flip one of your insiders and get them to give up credentials, or for whatever reason you have an outsider that is able to get credentials another way and impersonate a user, how do you distinguish whether someone is truly a trusted user within the organization or not, when they have valid credentials and they're doing things that maybe in someone's work role might seem like it's a little bit reasonable? How do you know? So those are some key challenges that come up when we're trying to reduce insider threat in today's world. But of course, there's things that we can do about this, right? And so that's the important piece to keep in mind. And so the question really becomes, how do you build and adapt your insider threat program to meet these challenges and overcome these challenges in today's world? And the best way to do that is by making sure that as a part of your threat management program, you have one that is user-centric. You have one that focuses on user behavior and focuses on really looking at beyond some of those traditional detection methods and things like that, which again are a good starting point. But it's looking beyond that to figure out how we can truly understand user behavior from an insider standpoint, and whether that is truly activity or things that we can trust versus not. And so a couple of suggestions and things there are: one, of course, keeping users at the core of that strategy. Building a robust training and awareness program, I think, is really important. Anytime an attacker or anytime threats are targeting human beings, which is usually the case with social engineering, the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, is to make sure that people are trained and aware of what they need to do. And then as we see these trends rise in the deepfake arena, it's making sure that you are covering those kinds of topics in the training as well. That, hey, if you get a call from someone or you hear audio from someone that sounds legitimate, but the ask just sounds weird or the ask just sounds off, how can you find another way to verify the validity of that ask? Same with advanced governance processes, piggybacking on that same topic. It's like if there should probably be more layers to how that kind of let's say, wire transfers, because that's usually from a deepfake standpoint and from a social engineering standpoint, that's the most popular outcome, right? And so if we know that wire transfers are like one of the biggest issues, what kinds of governance processes can we put in place to reduce that risk? And so it's really starting to think about, transfers are just one example, but when you think about the potential impacts of these kinds of attacks on a company, what are the processes and things you can put in place for those added checks to reduce the risks and likelihood of those attacks being successful? Another piece is drawing key insight from data through user behavior analytics. So as users are, doing their day-to-day work, and as they're, brought into the company, like you have all of these data points that you can start to evaluate and use and begin to score in order to truly determine levels of risk in certain behavior. And then, of course, leveraging next generation threat detection and response tools, which I think ties in that user behavior analytics standpoint as well. Another thing that I'll just mention here as well is, of course, the concept of zero trust becomes very important here, right? And just making sure that you have ways to really verify users, or the common theme, right, of like never trust, always verify. In today's world, that's the world that we live in, and something that I truly believe we have to embrace. And so yeah, I think that those are just some good tidbits on kind of where the world is going from a social engineering standpoint, especially in today's world, and some high-level programmatic shifts and things that can be done to adapt. And so at this point, it's one thing to talk about some of these things and share the trends. It's another thing to actually see how solutions can really start to address some of these challenges. And so for that, we have John Beach, who I will hand over control to give us a quick overview of Cerebral, which can help with a lot of the insider threat challenges that I have talked about here today.
Thank you very much for that, Christina. Wonderful information on what's taking place in these times currently with the phishing expeditions. And one point I want to steal from her presentation for all the attendees is 60% of new hires are an IT risk. So here at Veriata, we help you with letting you know what these employees are up to, whether they're at your location within the four walls or working from home. So that's a big topic to discuss with Veriata. We always want to keep security up to date, let you know what's taking place with these people, whether they're home or within the four walls of the office. And we do that through insider threat security detection, productivity and engagements, and the ability to stay compliant, whether there might be in a financial industry, a healthcare industry. We provide information so you can be proactive rather than reactive. And once again, we'll jump right into Cerebral here and discuss some of the key points here for monitoring of employees and what we can provide you with feedback and alerting. So under the Cerebral platform, under one pane of glass, we have a single integrated platform with our user behavior analytics, which is the built-in AI piece. As she mentioned, false positives in that. We help you with that by laying baselines on employees after 21 business days, and we will alert you on their anomalies in behavior, whether it's document tracking, the way they write an email, or resource usage trying to hit an application or a drive they never touch, as well as our detailed piece, which is our activity monitoring, which constantly is giving you alerts and data back to the server and what the employee is doing. And then we also have a high-level predictive risk scoring that goes hand in hand with the user behavior analytics, and it helps admins see who might become a risk within the organization. And we talk about that here quickly. We're based on the Palo Alto Research Center. We have the CERT insider threat data sets that can, help you with all of this information. And as we go back to the psychological factors, what the person might be doing, maybe there's a family or financial issue at the house that you're unaware of as an employer, what's taking place, maybe something's taking place, they didn't get a promotion, so they might become a rogue employee. With our built-in analytics, we help discover these employees that might become a risk to your business model. And we do that through our insider threat and security compliance here. Some of the factors here, as we mentioned, everybody has firewalls, logic put into place with tools once they're within the VPN walls, right? What really transpires when they disconnect? Maybe they take a document off the network at the corporation. Now they disconnect from the VPN. there is no visibility of what they're doing at that point. Maybe it's a customer list, a price list. Now they're going to work for a competitor and they're going to blind carbon copy or change a document name and send that to their personal Gmail or Hotmail account. That's a violation, of course, of compliance, as well as the handbook they signed when they became an employee. We help you detect that by alerting, as well as video playbacks of what is taking place. So instances, if there's billing for healthcare, you have compliance with like 163.308 and 164, whether it's an FTC 15 reg. We help you with all the insight to what is taking place, whether they're inside the four walls or working from home via Wi-Fi. And once again, we're showing the corporate walls here on these presentations, what's taking place, and all the pullouts where everything is taking, the data is moving around at will here. We're helping you monitor this one central location and making sure everybody is on the up and up. And here at Viriato, it's a pretty straightforward setup. We're an on-premise solution, which is very secure. All of our data at rest is all encrypted, AES 256. All the data in motion is TLS 1.2 and 1.3 back to your server, where you'll have all your authentications and that to see the data. We support the Mac laptops and desktops, all the PCs, as well as terminal servers, and the Droid tablet and phone. As I mentioned here, I just wanted to show you these and highlight these once again. And then going on, so our recorder monitors all these aspects you're seeing on the screen with the built-in AI, the psycholinguistics of how an email and body is written, which is a real powerful piece of the AI, language tones, if they're always going from a positive to a negative or vice versa. If it's always we and us and goes to me and I, will alert you on that. Credentials, maybe they're logging in with somebody else's password, after hour logins, those type of things, as well as document tracking. We watch what they do with that, tracking, as well as printing. So if they print 10 pages a week, and then 1 week they print 100, that's not their normal behavior. What are they up to? We're alerting you. Then you can go back and look at the video playbacks and see exactly what they're up to. So we cover all these areas, keystrokes, what they're doing on websites. If you're looking at a productivity window, we give you active time, which is keyboard mouse movement, focus time if a page is left in the foreground and no activity, is same thing with an application, and then a total time metrics. We monitor all emails and chat and IMs, as well as I mentioned printing there. We monitor all of this activity that you're seeing currently on the screen. And we do have different role-based feature sets here to help you set up groups or what somebody might be watching, as well as higher security risk. When she mentioned 60% of new employees are a high risk. Are they there really to do their job? Or are they there to sell data to a third party? So these are ways that we can really give you insight to what's taking place within your four walls at your corporation here. And we do it once again through these high risk scoring here. So you'll notice on the screen, you can see here the red activity here. And these areas are call outs for admins, and we have storyboards that show you what took place to get you to that level and become a high risk employee. Maybe they were dubbed to do more work or transfer more documents, and then you can verify that with a false positive, looking back at the videos to make sure that was completely done correctly. And then once again, we're giving you visibility of what is being sent, what is taking place, and it looks like this. You can see these bars here at the bottom as well. Oops, sorry. What is taking place? What's there? Accidental leak, espionage, financial fraud, what it may be, copying stuff to a USB down here in my left corner panels. What activity is taking place? So we give you a high-level view as well as storyboards to see what took place, and then video playback to confirm what exactly did take place. And this is sort of how we're watching, what's taking place, the insider threat intelligent platform. We're watching what's taking place on the employee. The tools are analyzing what is really taking place, whether it's a keyword alert or an anomaly alert being sent back to you, then seeing that data in the video playback, and then reacting to that to be proactive rather than reactive with any type of data infiltration or breach, to be compliant and be on the up and up and get ahead of a problem before it really becomes a major problem. And as I mentioned, we have the video playback throughout our product on all modules. So we give you the visibility, sort of like what you're reading here, time capsule playback. It's all watermarked, the ability to export these into an AVI file, or even export this data into a SIM tool, whether it be ArcSight, Splunk, or any of the tools that might support the JSys log, those type of formats, and we can help you with exporting data in that fashion if there is a need to go to trial or something of that nature. And I didn't want to take up too much time here. I want Christine to open up the floor for some discussions here, but if you would like to see more on how we can help your organization look at these things that Christine is talking about and how to address them with a tool like ours, it's a monitoring tool of employees and letting you see what they're doing throughout the day, please get back to us. We're more than happy to help.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, John. Great overview of the Cerebral platform. And again, a very good way to address a lot of the threats that we've talked about today. Now, we have time for a couple of questions. One of the first ones, and I think this is a good one for you, John. Can you talk more about the predictive risk scoring and what kinds of factors or attributes go into like what's a high risk employee versus low risk and so on?
Right, great question. So that goes back to the built-in AI piece that I think you touched on in your presentation as well. So what we do is we have recording profile setups that allow you to set high-risk employees. So basically, we have a baseline after 21 business days and 3 areas of expertise to rate them. The first one would be the document tracking. If they're moving large amounts of data up to the cloud, USB, OneDrive, whatever it may be, so they do 10 documents a week and they do 100, it's going to notify you that something's changing their behavior. And I previously mentioned the psycholinguistics of an email content of a body. That's the second area. And then the third area is the resource usage. So we look at this, we analyze the data, and we move them up the ladder based upon what they're doing and how much documents being moved around or what it may be, in order to see that risk score. And then we give you that dashboard where you can do a deep dive with storyboards and see exactly what got them to that.
Nice. And so it sounds like that's something that is customizable and like can be tailored to the organization, right?
Right. You can set the baselines, you can make them very tight, or you can open them up so the false positives are further in between based upon how you want it to do. And it is a constant learning tool. So it's constantly learning if they're changing departments as well.
Got it. Good. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, I think that answers that question for that one. Another one that has come through are what are specific things that can be done to get ahead of deepfakes? I'm happy to kick this one off, and if you want to add anything, of course, John, feel free to. But I think from my perspective, I had touched on getting more specific with training and awareness and helping people just like remain much more cautious and much more vigilant to the content that comes by and the content that they choose to interact with. Again, I think those processes become important. So if you look at your organization and think about what could possibly go wrong if someone was able to impersonate a senior leader or able to impersonate anyone in the company, essentially. I think that's a nice brainstorming session to figure out, okay, what could go wrong? What are processes that can be approved through just a conversation or through some of these things, and how can we then add in appropriate checks and balances and better processes to avoid that kind of thing. Of course, from a technology standpoint, I think that being able to block and tackle a lot of that content before it even gets to the user is important. And so that's another sort of proactive piece. And then I think that like I've seen companies start to get creative and try to find ways to validate the authenticity of certain requests in ways that are still very novel, like putting watermarks on things or having like a code word that switches frequently, like all of these very basic things that some folks are doing to get around some of these risks. So I've seen that as well. John, anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. I don't see any other like major questions coming through. The last thing that I want to touch on, because I realized I didn't say this before, in terms of reducing insider threat in especially in like today's world, and as people continue to work remotely and hybrid, is we've talked about the technology in ways that can help. We've talked about like processes and all of that. I'm a really huge fan of approaching security from the standpoint of the human being, right? And so we've talked about user-centric approaches and things like that. But one thing that cannot be overlooked is really understanding the root cause of some of the insider threat, doing that root cause analysis to figure out where some of these threats are coming from. Because sometimes it's that people are overwhelmed and making a ton of mistakes that they wouldn't make otherwise. And so helping employees and helping people find that balance of not being overworked, like creating safe spaces for people to report issues without being scared that they'll lose their jobs, right? Making sure that your employees aren't disgruntled, or setting up processes to avoid those kinds of situations, making sure that employees who are no longer within the company no longer have access. A lot of these threats come from people who have since left the company and still have been able to access certain systems and things like that. And so I say all that to say, this requires a well-rounded approach of, again, having the technology layer, which is so critical, right? Having the right processes in place and really focusing on the root cause and how to empower people to reduce some of these threats as well. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Any final thoughts or anything you want to add, John, as I wrap up?
No, I think it was a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed all the insight. And if anybody has any other questions out there, with regards to employee monitoring and the user behavior analytics, please let us know. We're here to help you and make sure that your employees are really doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, this has been a great conversation. Again, feel free to reach out to the Veriato team to schedule a demo today. That concludes the webinar. So thank you all so much for joining. Thanks, John, again, for the amazing overview. Thanks to Veriato for hosting this. And you all have a good day.
Well, thank you as well. Have a wonderful day.